You ever sit in a car dealership and feel this weird disconnect between what the numbers on the paperwork say and what your gut is telling you? The salesperson is smiling. The monthly payment technically fits your budget. The car looks perfect, but somewhere deep down, there's this quiet voice asking if you're about to make a massive mistake. Most people ignore that voice. They sign the papers, drive home feeling excited for about 3 days, and then spend the next 6 years with this low-level financial stress they can't quite shake, wondering why they never seem to have any money left over despite earning a decent salary. My name's Anderson, and I've watched people at every income level make the same fundamental error with car purchases, not because they're stupid or financially illiterate, but because they've been taught to think about affordability in a way that benefits lenders and dealerships, not their actual financial future. So let me show you what your salary actually buys you in terms of a vehicle, not what a bank will approve, not what makes you look successful. What you can actually afford without quietly destroying your ability to build wealth over the next 20 years. And I guarantee the numbers are going to be lower than what you think, lower than what you want to hear, but understanding why they're lower, understanding what you're actually trading when you spend more, might be the most valuable financial lesson you learn this year. Here's what most people believe about car affordability. If the monthly payment fits your budget, you can afford the car. If your take-home is $4,000 monthly and the payment is $500, that's only 12.5% of your income. Totally reasonable, right? But that belief is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of what afford actually means. Because affording something isn't about whether you can technically make the payments. It's about whether buying that thing serves your long-term financial interests or actively works against them. And here's the contrarian truth that changes everything. For most people at most income levels, the car they think they can afford is at least double what they should actually buy, maybe triple. And the gap between those two numbers, between what feels affordable and what actually is, represents years of lost wealth accumulation that most people never even realize they're giving up. Cars are unique in the consumer landscape because they combine the worst possible financial characteristics. They're expensive, they depreciate rapidly, they require ongoing costs beyond the purchase price, and they're emotionally charged in ways that override rational decision-making. Most people know intellectually that new cars lose value the moment you drive them away, but they don't internalize what that means for their wealth. They don't calculate the actual cost over time. They just focus on whether they can make this month's payment. And that narrow focus is exactly what keeps them from ever building substantial savings. The people who actually build wealth understand something that everyone else misses. Transportation is a utility, not an investment, not a reward, not a reflection of your worth, a utility. And utilities should be optimized for cost effectiveness, not maximized for status or enjoyment. So let me show you what the math actually looks like at different income levels, because once you see these numbers clearly, your entire framework for car buying will shift. Let's start with someone earning $50,000 annually. After taxes, you're taking home roughly $37,000 or about $3,000 monthly. The standard guidance says your total transportation costs, payment, insurance, fuel, maintenance, should be no more than 10 to 15% of gross income. Let's use 12% as a middle ground. That's $6,000 annually or $500 monthly for all transportation. Insurance might run you $150 monthly, fuel another $100, maintenance and registration maybe $50. That leaves you $200 monthly for an actual car payment. At $200 per month with a 4-year loan at typical used car rates, you're looking at a purchase price around $8,000. Maybe $10,000 if you have a decent down payment. $8,000 to $10,000. For someone earning $50,000 annually, that's the actual number if you want to avoid being car poor. I know what you're thinking. That buys basically nothing. A decade-old economy car with 100,000 miles. Nothing exciting, nothing that impresses anyone. You're right, it doesn't, but here's what it does buy: the ability to save money, the ability to invest for your future, the ability to not spend the next 5 years stressed about whether you can afford the payment. The person earning $50,000 who buys a $15,000 car with a $350 payment thinks they're being reasonable. They're not buying anything extravagant. But that extra 150 monthly, 1800 annually represents 18,000 over 10 years. Invested at reasonable returns, that becomes 30,000 over 20 years. They didn't buy a nicer car, they sold 30,000 in future wealth. Now let's look at 75,000 annually. Take home is roughly 55,000 or about 4,600 monthly. Using that same 12% guideline, you have 9,000 annually for transportation, 750 monthly. After insurance, fuel, and maintenance, let's say 300, you have 450 for a payment. At 4 years with decent financing, that's roughly a $15,000 to $17,000 vehicle. 15 to 17,000 for someone earning 75,000, still nowhere near the $25,000 or $30,000 cars that banks will happily approve you for at this income level. Because here's what the bank isn't telling you: they profit when you're in debt to them. They want you to buy as much car as possible, finance it for as long as possible, and pay as much interest as possible. Your financial health is irrelevant to their business model, but your financial health is extremely relevant to your future. That person who only bought the $15,000 car instead of the $30,000 car just freed up 300 monthly. Over 5 years, that's 18,000. Over 20 years invested, that becomes over 160,000. One decision, one moment of restraint, 160,000 in opportunity cost. At 100,000 annually, take home is roughly 70,000 or about 5,800 monthly. 12% gives you 12,000 annually, 1,000 monthly for all transportation. After fixed costs, you might have 550 to 600 for a payment. That's a vehicle in the $20,000 to $25,000 range. 20 to 25,000 for someone earning six figures. Not the $50,000 luxury SUV, not the fully loaded pickup truck, a nice late model used sedan, reliable, functional, boring. And here's where high earners make their biggest mistake. They think earning 100,000 means they've made it financially, that they deserve the nice car, that they should look successful. But the math doesn't care about what you deserve or how you want to look. The math only cares about opportunity cost. That person who buys the $50,000 vehicle instead of the $25,000 vehicle is making payments of roughly $900 monthly instead of $500. That $400 difference over 7 years is $33,000 in payments. Invested over 20 years, that becomes over $200,000 in lost wealth. They're not buying a car. They're buying the appearance of success at the cost of actual financial security. Here's what happens psychologically when you buy too much car, and this is where the real damage occurs that most people never connect to their vehicle choice. When you have a car payment that's eating 15 or 20% of your income, you're operating in constant financial stress mode. Not acute stress, not panic, just this persistent low-level anxiety about money that never quite goes away. Every unexpected expense feels threatening, every month feels tight. You're making decisions about whether you can afford other things based on the fact that 600 or 700 is already spoken for before you even start. This stress compounds. It affects your sleep, your relationships, your willingness to take career risks that might improve your situation. You're trapped by a decision you made years ago that felt reasonable at the time, but is now constraining everything else in your financial life. But when you buy an appropriate vehicle, when your transportation is truly affordable, something different happens. Those extra hundreds stay in your account. They go towards savings, investments, or just margin for life's irregularities. You're not stressed about the payment because the payment is small enough that it doesn't dominate your budget. And that psychological freedom, that ability to breathe financially, is worth more than any luxury feature or status symbol. The person driving the paid-off 10-year-old Civic sleeps better than the person driving the financed BMW. Not because the Civic is a better car, but because the Civic owner isn't quietly worried about money every single month. Now, let's talk about what actually enables people to make good decisions about cars, because understanding the principle isn't enough if you can't execute when you're sitting across from a salesperson who's trained to overcome your objections. The key is separating your identity from your transportation. Most people see their car as an extension of themselves, as a statement about who they are, what they've achieved, how they want to be perceived, and that emotional attachment is what makes rational decision making impossible. You need to reframe completely. Your car is a tool that gets you from point A to point B, nothing more. It's not a reflection of your worth. It's not a reward for your hard work. It's not a statement about your success. It's transportation. Once you make that mental shift, everything becomes easier. You stop comparing your car to your coworker's car. You stop feeling like you deserve something nicer because you got a promotion. You stop making decisions based on what other people might think. You just buy the most cost-effective, reliable transportation available and move on with your life. And the mental energy you save, the freedom from caring about what your car says about you, is worth more than you'd imagine. Here's another angle most people miss. The timeline matters enormously, not just for the payment, but for what that money could become if deployed differently. Let's say you're 30 years old and deciding between a $12,000 car and a $25,000 car. The difference is roughly $250 monthly over 5 years. That's $15,000 in payments. But you're not choosing between $12,000 and $25,000. You're choosing between $12,000 and $25,000 plus all the growth that $15,000 would have generated over the next 35 years until retirement. At 8% returns, that $15,000 becomes $168,000 by the time you're 65. You didn't choose to spend an extra $13,000 on a nicer car. You chose to have $168,000 less at retirement. Think about what that money could do. That's years of living expenses. That's the difference between retiring at 65 and retiring at 62. That's the buffer that lets you weather market downturns without panic. And you traded all of that for leather seats and a nicer sound system that you stopped noticing within 6 months. This is the opportunity cost calculation that wealthy people make instinctively and everyone else completely ignores. Every dollar spent on a depreciating asset is a dollar not invested in appreciating assets. And over decades, that distinction compounds into life-changing differences. Now, here's the warning that everyone considering a car purchase needs to hear. The financing terms are designed to trick you into thinking you can afford more than you actually can. Dealerships will stretch loans to 6, 7, even 8 years to get the monthly payment down to a number that doesn't immediately send you running. They'll focus entirely on the payment, never mentioning the total cost or the years of your life you'll spend making payments. That $40,000 truck at $625 monthly for 7 years sounds manageable. It's not insane. Lots of people have payments that high or higher. But here's what you're actually committing to. $52,500 in total payments over 84 months. 7 years of your life where $625 disappears every single month. 7 years from now, you'll still be making payments on a truck that's worth maybe $20,000. You'll be underwater on the loan for most of that period, unable to sell without writing a check to cover the difference. And if you need to trade it in early, you'll roll negative equity into your next loan, starting the whole destructive cycle over again. Meanwhile, the person who bought the $15,000 used truck will have paid it off in 3 years. They'll have spent the next 4 years investing that payment instead of making it, and they'll have an asset that's worth almost as much as yours while having built $30,000 in investments you don't have. Same function, radically different financial outcomes. Let me show you one more thing that makes this even clearer. The total cost of ownership over time. That new $35,000 SUV loses about $8,000 in value the first year just from depreciation. That's before any payments, insurance, or operating costs. You're paying $8,000 to own a vehicle for 12 months. Meanwhile, The 3-year-old version of that same SUV purchased for $22,000 will lose maybe $2,000 in value that first year. You're getting the same transportation for $6,000 less in depreciation alone. Over 5 years, the new vehicle will lose roughly $21,000 in value. The used vehicle will lose about $8,000. That $13,000 difference in depreciation is on top of whatever you saved on purchase price. Most people never calculate this because they're focused on the payment. But depreciation is a real cost. It's money you're losing whether you think about it or not. And choosing to lose more money faster on a depreciating asset might be the least rational financial decision possible. Here's what life looks like when you actually follow these guidelines versus when you ignore them. Person A earns $75,000 and buys a $15,000 car, pays it off in 3 years, continues making the payment to themselves by investing that money. After 10 years, they have a paid off vehicle worth maybe $5,000 plus, roughly $65,000 in investments from the payments they didn't make on a more expensive car. Person B earns the same $75,000 but buys a $35,000 car, makes payments for 6 years. After 10 years, they have a paid off vehicle worth maybe $12,000 and zero investments from phantom payments because they were still making real payments until recently. Same income, person A has $70,000 in net worth from their vehicle choice, person B has $12,000, a $58,000 difference from one decision about transportation. That's not a minor optimization. That's a life-changing wealth gap created purely by understanding what you can actually afford versus what a bank will approve you for. So here's where we are. The car you can actually afford is probably 30 to 50% less expensive than what you think you can afford, and definitely far less than what you want to drive. That gap between actual affordability and perceived affordability is where most people's wealth building plans go to die. You can ignore this. Most people do. You can buy the car that makes you feel successful and hope everything works out. You can make the payment that's technically manageable and just accept that you'll always feel a little stressed about money. Or you can recognize that transportation is a utility, not an identity, that vehicles are tools, not rewards, that the goal isn't to look successful but to become financially secure. The choice you make about your next vehicle will reverberate through your financial life for the next 20 years. Every dollar you overspend is a dollar not invested. Every month of unnecessary payments is a month your wealth could have been compounding instead of depleting. 20 years from now, when you're looking at your financial position and deciding whether you can retire on schedule or need to work another 5 years, you might trace that decision back to a single moment in a dealership when you chose between the sensible option and the attractive one. And if you chose sensibly, if you bought the boring, reliable car instead of the exciting, expensive one, you'll be grateful, not because you sacrificed, but because you understood what money is actually for. It's not for looking successful today, it's for being secure tomorrow. That's the difference. That's always been the difference. And now you know exactly how much car your salary actually buys, not in theory, in reality. The question is whether you'll act on it.